All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. Timothy, are you ready to do this?
Let's go.
All right, man, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have my guest today, Timothy Bailey. Tim, welcome.
Thanks. It's nice to meet you, Guy.
So Tim Bailey is an artist and bandleader in Richmond, Virginia. He's a survivor of severe and prolonged childhood abuse resulting in lifelong post-traumatic mental illness. His acclaimed debut album, Timothy Bailey and the Humans, traces his narrative from despair and isolation to hope and connection. He's passionate about contributing to public understanding of early trauma's effects, as well as advocating for art as an indispensable tool for healing. Now, on your About page, I want to just share this if I can. You say, more than once, I found myself wandering around the streets of Washington, D.C. with my shirt buttoned wrong, unsure of who I was or where I was. Each time I found a piece of paper in my pocket with a phone number on it that I didn't recognize and called it. The number was for my therapist, and she would tell me how to get home. The search for a path out of trauma led to the founding of your band, Timothy Bailey and the Humans. Tim, welcome.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
So before we get started here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah, I grew up in the Hampton Roads region of Virginia, near the coast, and moved to Richmond, the state's capital, in the early 90s because the band that I was playing in at the time was here. And I've more or less been here ever since. I had a brief foray in the Washington, D.C. area where I went to graduate school for a spell.
Okay. So, well, let's get into this. How the hell did all this start?
Yeah, well, I think that there's no way around the reality that it began grimly. I was abused by my parents, beginning very early. So was my sister. We both left childhood with serious psychiatric conditions characterized by profound dissociation. And I mean, that is the beginning. That is also the hurdle that I have been attempting to overcome ever since. It has been a long and arduous process. I am now 50 years old and have just released my debut album, where many of my contemporaries, people I collaborated with in my early 20s, were doing this kind of thing before they were 30. And my path has been different. I've mostly just been attempting to heal through therapy and other modes, hospitalizations and the like. So I've had a difficult path, and over the last several years have found enough stability to be able to get the work of my heart done.
Congratulations on the album.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
So what ages are we talking about here when this started?
Yeah. I was having some complex PTSD experiences before I was 10, but they were, ignored. I grew up in a medical family. My father was a physician. And eventually the problems during late high school became profound enough that ignoring them was no longer tenable. I got, sort of cursory treatment around the advent of Prozac. Before going to college, I had my first complete breakdown. I was 17 and in music school outside of New York City. So that's sort of where the intermittent pattern of extreme instability got going, and music was always connected to that. It was always a way out always played a role. So really, my problems were serious by 17. But people kind of fake it till they make it, or they rely on their stronger parts of themselves. And I was able to more or less make my way through life. It was a little rickety, but I was managing until I was around, I guess, 30. And I was actually in a PhD program for counseling psychology outside of DC when I collapsed in a way that I was never able to really come back to a stable life until recently.
Let's get to that. But before we do, what was happening for you at 17 around that time? How was this manifesting outwardly?
Yeah, it's a lot of classic dissociative stuff, feeling like I was watching my life on a movie, frequently feeling like I was outside of myself, looking at parts of my body that were out of scale, losing a little bit of time here and there, and a sort of that kind of eerie and profound sense of the self leaving itself.
Mm-hmm. And did you know what was going on? Like,
absolutely not.
Okay. No. So there was no correlation, like, oh my God, I had experienced all this abuse. Absolutely
not. I would have characterized my family as having been happy. And if you as a clinician had scratched the surface, you would have not heard happiness. You would have heard terrible stories that were being mischaracterized as normal or as games. But I did not know in myself what I had experienced. I didn't know how to characterize it properly.
Were your friends aware of what was going on? Did you share with anybody? Did you?
Yes and no. I think water seeks its own level. And I think that not all, but many of my friends at the time were in maybe not as severely abusive home lives, but that we were a group of misfits who didn't have a lot of love.
At what point, or was there a point when you wanted to seek some kind of help?
Yeah. I came up to Richmond. I was just shy of 20. I was playing in bands. That was going well. And I quit college to do a job that I enjoyed. And I had a very caring boss at the time, and it became clear to him that something was wrong. And he knew a therapist who was very skilled and was very, very helpful to me. My defenses in my 20s were just profoundly strong. I wasn't really ready to dig in and do the work. But he certainly paved the path for later work. So I began getting help in my early 20s. And then classically, I thought I had it licked after a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And did you seek help for what?
I was calling it depression at that time. I was calling it clinical depression, but looking back and in journals and stuff, it's clear that it was, boilerplate complex post-trauma. Mm-hmm. Again, the dissociative experiences that I had mentioned before, as well as just affect that seemed to come from somebody else suddenly, mm-hmm. Body movements that I couldn't account for. Mm. The kind of the whole panoply of serious post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Did the therapists you saw at that time, did they recognize that this was trauma related?
This is the middle 90s. And I think so. My guess, he's deceased, unfortunately, a lovely man. My guess is that he understood quite a bit about what was going on, but that I was only able to go so far. I mean, I remember him saying something about like, yes, you want to take the Band-Aid off, but you might not want to take it all off at once, Mm-hmm. So my guess is he had a lot more insight about what was going on with me than I did, and was titrating it as best he could. But I thought I had completed therapy after a few years.
Right. So share with us how music came into the scene here for you.
Yeah. Well, I began. There was a culture of just oppressive hostility and unhappiness at home, and I'm not sure how I initially got interested in the guitar, but I did, and it was throughout high school. An utter obsession. I mean, I was someone who practiced during the summers, 8-10 hours a day.
Wow.
And it's funny looking back on it. I'm not as good of a player as I should be for the amount of time I put in. I think there was a powerful distracting component to that. Just like here's the obsession that keeps me from feeling anything. Mm-hmm. But I enjoyed it. And I initially went to music school. That was frankly disastrous, but I didn't give up on music. I just shifted my focus from jazz to more singer-songwriter type of stuff, rock music.
If I may, disastrous, yeah. How was music school disastrous?
I had my first just genuine breakdown and had to be medically withdrawn from school. It was one of those moments of such extreme abstraction from self that I barely knew who or where I was. That's when that began. The strongest presentation of it began when I was 17 at music school. And so I had to be withdrawn.
And you were withdrawn to where?
Home.
Okay.
Not a great place to have been. And I was in kind of a catatonic torpor, more or less, on and off for 6 months. But as soon as I could, I got out and moved to Richmond for this band that I had been a part of.
And for the band, talk to us about reintegrating into your music. What was that like for you?
It had nothing in common with my sort of stultifying suburban upper middle class background, which had been kind of Reagan Republican, culturally middle of the road. I cared about art. I cared about creative life. And that wasn't a part of my family. So I think being in a rock band, it wasn't exactly punk rock, like out screaming in the streets or something, but it was different enough that it was a domain where I felt that I could find some modicum of safety and fellow feeling with other people who cared about creative work.
Mm-hmm. And what were you doing in that band? Were you playing the guitar and singing?
Yeah, I was playing guitar and singing.
Okay. Yeah. So how do things unfold? You get into this band, you've just experienced, or at some point previously, you've just experienced this intense breakdown.
Yeah, I had my MO, I don't think it's unusual, was after the intense breakdown and purported recovery was to deny that I'd had the experience at all. Not externally. I would admit it, the facts of it, but I wouldn't admit the substance of it to you or to myself. So as far as I was concerned, I was just going along as any other 20-year-old playing in a band, which at that time entailed driving around in a van with unwashed other young men playing at horrible bars until the middle of the night. It was dues paying, a lot of heavy dues paying. It was an interesting time. That was right after Nirvana. And at that time, there were still record companies in a way that there no longer are that really did throw sums of money at young and promising bands to make a record. And, we had our brushes with that. My main collaborator in the band later went on to be a very successful musician in his own right. Mm-hmm. So it was formative and wonderful. But after a few years, I was burned out, and I just frankly wasn't doing well mentally. I needed some other path.
And what was that path?
I was convinced that I needed a more professional path. I grew up in an education system and in a social milieu where there were high expectations. And so I thought I was supposed to be a professional. And that's when I kind of put myself on the path towards going to graduate school to become a therapist.
And?
Bad idea. There should be a club. There should be a club.
Cliffhangers.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There should be a club for those of us who go to all the trouble of applying to and getting into competitive PhD programs only to find out that what we really need is more help. And that I could not be any more that person. So I wound up at the University of Maryland. Actually, it's interesting. Christine Courtois was in the first graduating class in the counseling psychology PhD program that I wound up in.
Oh, wow.
I picked a really good place to completely come undone, because when that happened, which was a few months into the first semester, it was the kind of thing that I couldn't fake my way out of. I'd sort of, before being in a band or going to public school, it wasn't that challenging. A smart person can kind of thread the needle. But when you're in a PhD program like that, and you've got research responsibilities, you're beginning to do practica, there's coursework. Man, if you're not on it, it's going to show. And it was too much adult life for me at that time, and the collapse was dramatic, public. I lost the ability to move or speak in the graduate student lounge. And the little clip that you read from my bio on the website addresses this time of life. I lived in DC. I managed to remain homed, but that was always a question. My therapist at that time was actually sharing office space with Dr. Courtois. And I was lucky to find her. I was in several times a week therapy, sometimes with phone calls in between. I benefited greatly from the Psychiatric Institute of Washington's trauma program, both the day program and the inpatient program, on and off for a couple of years. Really it was life-saving. So
at this point, was there a recognition that you had experienced trauma?
It began. It actually, I think it was evident. And I was at that point admitting that there had been anger problems, but I was having just wild abreactions that I didn't understand in flashes. And I was prescribed a little bit of Klonopin. And the first one of those that I took, I think it kind of unwound all the obsessive binding that had kept things close. And that's when it just I was living in a world of eclipsing terror. And it became clear that, there was specific memory attached. A lot of that has still taken a long time to be able to face. I don't know that I'll ever have a complete autobiographical narrative of all the things that happened, but I'm 20 years into this, and it's not like it's all processed, but it was a flood all at once.
Can I just say, first of all, I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this. And damn, dude, your journey is so intense.
Yeah.
And your ability, and I realize we're scratching the surface here of everything, but your ability to manage however you did, is what's the word? I can't imagine going through what you've gone through and being able to do this. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that you're incredible to have done this.
Thank
Jesus.
You. Yeah. Thanks, Guy. Look, it's part of why I've been reaching out to people with platforms to discuss trauma. It's kind of weird being an artist trying to get an album out. Like, that's a hard thing these days, especially when you're a 50-year-old man. Like, there's kind of a resounding silence when you put it out there, and suddenly it's on Spotify, along with 80 million other songs. And then there's this other piece of me that is really eager to talk about trauma survivorship and finding outlets that have any interest in the overlapping Venn diagram there is difficult. So I'm very grateful to be here and to tell this story. I also have to say, like, I guess I guess it is a story of resilience and of survivorship. It's still not easy. And the self-states who are presenting themselves can often step up and appear quite strong and competent, but I still struggle. And I don't anticipate that ending, although it has gotten better. And the one other thing I want to say is I haven't done it alone. For someone with the kind of level of sadistic violence in his past that I have, it's somewhat of a miracle that I was able to have human relationships at all, including most primarily with my therapist, but then also with caring friends without whom I wouldn't be here. There's that Beatles song, I get by with a little help from my friends. And for me, it's like I would rewrite it as I get by with a huge and ongoing, constant, nurturing support from a small group of lovely people.
At what point? Well, there are a couple of things I want to ask you about here. I'm curious about at what point you said, you know what, I want to share this with other people. No,
yeah.
But before we get that, I also want to ask you, when did you get to a point where you kind of felt like something or someone was quote unquote helping you work through this?
That began in the later months of 2001, beginning months of 2002, and that's the therapist who I refer to in that little piece from my bio. I wouldn't be here without her help. I happened to have fallen apart in a place at the University of Maryland where we had a list of therapists. Someone knew to call this particular therapist who had experience dealing with the toughest cases. So I've had help the whole time, but as you know, accepting that help can take years. Mm-hmm. Developing the trust of that one person. I always think of it as similar to, the story of Helen Keller learning the concept of water from Annie Sullivan with her hand under the well, mm-hmm. and having the letters written on her hand until it all clicks. Like, she's communicating to me about this. Mm-hmm. For me in therapy, that was a years-long process. I was a people pleaser and would go to therapy to be a good boy. Mm-hmm. But it took quite a while for me to trust that the enterprise existed to help me, mm-hmm. And to develop that trust. So the very beginning of 2002, developing that trust took a couple of years. And then it's been ongoing since then. Can you name something particularly specifically that did help you or help you realize something? Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, I probably wouldn't mention this in another podcast, but given the title of yours and who I presume your listenership, some of the transference stuff was sexual. I thought I was there to be exploited. Mm-hmm. And so if my therapist, there was one hallmark moment where she called me in the evening because I'd been having a really rough time, and I thought she was propositioning me. And I told her rather than stuffing that down. And that became a moment of, that the fundamental concept of working through the transference. That was the moment. Like once I really believed that wasn't what was happening, mm-hmm. That's where I think I really began to benefit from, what they call the real relationship. So that was one moment very early on where I realized not everyone was there to get something from me. Also, I've benefited from inpatient stays at some of the sadly now defunct trauma inpatient units where, at least back then, it was a little bit of a bare knuckles brawl. People weren't as worried about titrating stuff back then. And I really benefited from the confrontations that I experienced in some of those programs of like, no, this really happened. You belong here kind of stuff. Interesting. So that confrontational, why do you think that specifically helped you? Because I was kind of so committed to identifying out with the population of trauma survivors, even though I was saying, in substance, many of the same things as the others. Like, no, you're the messed up ones. I'm up here getting my PhD. I'm fine. And I wasn't fine. And there's a kind of no amount of a therapist asking open-ended questions that would have moved me towards acceptance as quickly as peers saying, dude, you are just absolutely full of it.
Right.
You, buddy, you are full of it. And I heard them.
I appreciate you sharing that. When, Tim, did you get to a point where you wanted to speak about this stuff and share this stuff?
Yeah, I had a real collapse in 2013. I was at Shepherd Pratt for a while, which was that program was helpful to me. And then I started to write music again within a few years. I would go through these periods of working on stuff and not working on stuff, quitting again. Like I'd start music and quit it and start music and quit it. And probably around 2015, I started to write in earnest again. I participated in an incredible writing workshop here for several years. It's called Life in 10 Minutes. And my dear friend Valley Haggard ran that. And it's you write on a timer with a group of people without any real concern about editing. And then you share what you've written with no crosstalk and no feedback. And that's where I really began to tell the story about everything that I've been through. And I've been shy to do that because, a lot of times if you tell these stories, A, a lot of people, even good people, don't believe you. And B, they think you should get over it. And so in Valley's writing workshop in 2015 to fairly recently, it was just an amazing experience of disclosing the truth of my life and having other people respond with care.
So was that just a particular right place, right time?
Absolutely. Yeah. A friend of mine who had enjoyed the class thought I would too, that kind of thing. And then I realized, the place for my writing has always been songs. I think I was probably by 2018, I was back to it. I'd formed this version of Timothy Bailey and the Humans by kind of asking my dream team and of other musicians to be in the band. And over 2018, 2019, and then during the pandemic, it just became clear to me that in terms of subject matter, the ins and outs of coping with overwhelming despair is what I had to offer. So the work itself hovers around really difficult material. It ain't party music. My view, though, is that nobody sings a sad song. No one sings the blues to make the listeners feel worse. The point is that everyone feels a little bit less alone. So I'm fundamentally interested in a concept that I've come to call the credible message of hope, which sort of says that to someone who's truly down, like really, really below rock bottom, expressions of hope can feel oppressive. It's sort of like, I can't move. I can't talk. I don't know my own name. How do you expect me to believe this Pollyanna-ish nonsense that I can have a nice life? And to me, the credible message of hope is the one where the world says no, 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 until it finally says maybe. And maybe is a difficult proposition to argue against. And that was a breakthrough in my therapy. It was like, I was like, I'm not going to make it. Well, maybe you will. It's hard to argue against. And so that's what I view as the fundamental spirit of the music that I'm making and of the album that we've just released is, look, yes, it's this bad. Maybe there's a way through. So the album is dark. It begins in kind of a murky place. It goes quite dark and ends with I hope, a beautiful maybe.
A beautiful maybe. I love that. I think that's going to be the title for this episode.
Okay, great.
I think that's awesome. Yeah. One of the things I admire about you is how you seem to keep moving. You're moving along. You're doing your music. You are putting your soul into your music. Is there any concern? Is there any thought like, okay, I am 50, I'm making music. How can I be making music about this real dark shit?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should. Maybe I just should sing about happy stuff, and that might help me get noticed more so.
I one of the co-producers of the album, and really the person who was able to get a lot of the necessary people in place, my friend Bob. It's always been a part of our friendship for close to 30 years, talking about being a creative person and the struggles. You kind of get a gallows humor about the inevitable like disappointments you have as a creative person. Mm-hmm. But I found myself recently saying, Bob, do you ever wish that you had a different passion, like maybe, I don't know, dual ledger accounting? And he said no. He said, no, come on, get real, man. So no, boy, for me to sing happy songs, like I actually have this is maybe a bigger topic, but I have a really strong view that a lot of the times what passes for art in trauma survivorship is actually propaganda. And it's toxic positivity a lot of the time. And I think ironically, what survivors need out of art are safe spots, safe places to experience art's inoculation effect, where you deal with the most difficult material in art. It's one of the beautiful things that art allows us to do, is in titrated doses encounter the worst parts of life. And for me, that's The Road by Cormac McCarthy, or The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison has been really important to me. And I think that sometimes we can think that art is supposed to be where you go and you make a nice picture of a flower or something to quote, feel better, when in fact what you might need is a place to express your rage and your contempt. Sometimes I worry that culturally, and then specifically even within trauma survivorship, we can try to put too nice a face on our creative work. And when we do that, we deny ourselves an important place to work through some of the most difficult issues.
Wow.
I feel very strongly about it.
Look, I would love to have you back at a later time. I think there's a lot more to talk about. Again, congratulations on the album. What's the title of the album called?
The album is self-titled. It is called Timothy Bailey and the Humans.
Okay.
You can find it at Bandcamp, but it's also on Apple Music and Spotify and all those places. Okay.
And we'll also have a link on the show notes to your website. And obviously people can get it through there.
Yeah. Okay.
What is the best way for people to contact you, Tim?
Thanks for asking. The email is hello@timothybaileyandthehumans.com. Bailey has an E, so Bailey.
Humans.com. Awesome. Look, you are incredibly inspiring, and I sincerely mean that. And I just love the way you strike me like this intense you're moving, right? You keep going.
I'm trying.
There's something very powerful and beautiful about that.
Thanks, man.
I appreciate you coming on here.
Hey, I appreciate your kind attention. I really do.
All right.
It's good to be heard.
I appreciate it. We'll be in touch. Love to have you back.
Thanks, Guy. Take care.
Right, I want to thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and I want to let you know that I am very excited about my new podcast, The Right Now Project. The Right Now Project is about healing. It's about stepping into our own courage and authenticity and getting started or continuing along our healing process. We're all going through something, whatever it is, in this crazy life we're living. And the Right Now Project is about honoring that, celebrating that, and sharing our stories via the associated membership site. Check us out at therightnowproject.com, therightnowproject.com.